My cousin announced at dinner that he'd sold our grandfather's land for cash. I nodded. He didn't know my name was already on the deed. Trevor stood at the head of the table, wine glass raised, smile so wide it looked painful. "I have an announcement," he said, and the room went quiet. Thanksgiving dinner at my aunt's house, 14 family members packed around a table groaning with turkey and stuffing, and Trevor choosing this moment to make whatever proclamation he'd been sitting on all evening. I watched him from my seat near the corner, fork halfway to my mouth, already sensing this wouldn't be good. Trevor was my cousin, 3 years older, and he'd spent our entire lives positioning himself as the successful one, the golden child. The one who'd made something of himself while I'd supposedly wasted my potential working construction and living in a rental downtown. "I've been working on something for the past 6 months, Trevor continued, letting the pause build dramatic tension. Something that's going to change all our lives, especially mine. He laughed at his own joke. No one else did. "I've sold Grandpa's property, the 40 acres on Ridgeline Road, sold it to a development company for $2.3 million. Cash. The deal closed yesterday." The room erupted. Questions fired from every direction. My Aunt Diane, Trevor's mother, looked shocked. My Uncle Paul choked on his wine. My own mother just stared at Trevor like he'd announced he was joining a cult. I stayed silent, watching, waiting to see how this would play out, because Trevor was lying. Or more accurately, Trevor thought he'd done something he absolutely had not done. The land Trevor was talking about had been in our family for 60 years. 40 acres of pristine woodland on the edge of town, bought by my grandfather in the 1960s when it was just scrubland nobody wanted. Over the decades, the town had grown around it, now that 40 acres was worth a fortune, bordered by new subdivisions and shopping centers. Developers had been circling for years, leaving letters in Grandpa's mailbox, showing up at his door with offers. He'd refused them all. "Land is the only thing they're not making more of," he'd always said. "You hold on to it, you pass it down, you don't sell out for a quick dollar." He'd died 8 months ago, and apparently Trevor had decided Grandpa's wishes didn't matter anymore. "How?" Uncle Paul asked, voice tight with anger. "How did you sell property that doesn't belong to you?" Trevor's smile didn't falter. "It does belong to me. Grandpa left it to me in his will. Everyone knows that. He wanted me to have it because I'm the only one who understands property value, who knows how to manage assets. The rest of you would have just let it sit there doing nothing." My mother's knuckles were white around her fork. "That's not what the will said, Trevor. It said you were to manage the property, not own it outright. It's supposed to be divided among all the grandchildren when we decide to sell. That's 7 people. You had no right." Trevor waved her off. "I had every right. I talked to 3 different lawyers. I have legal authority. The sale is done. Money's in the bank." I set down my fork carefully. Everyone was talking now. Voices overlapping, anger and confusion filling the room. My sister Natalie was demanding to see paperwork. My cousin Daphne was crying. Aunt Diane was trying to calm everyone down while simultaneously looking betrayed herself. And Trevor stood there, soaking it in, playing the role of the misunderstood visionary. He loved this. Loved being the center of attention, even negative attention. Loved feeling smarter than everyone else. I caught his eye across the table. He smirked at me. "I know you're upset too, Cameron, but you'll thank me later. Your share of the profits will be substantial. Well, not as substantial as mine since I did all the work, but still, more money than you'd see in 5 years of construction work." That's when I spoke for the first time since his announcement. "No, I won't." Trevor's smirk faltered. "What?" I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, let the moment stretch. "I said I won't be thanking you, because you didn't sell Grandpa's land. You can't sell property you don't own." The room went silent again, but this time the attention shifted to me. Trevor's smile returned, patronizing now. "Cameron, I know this is hard to accept. You probably feel like I went behind everyone's back, but legally," I cut him off. "Legally, that land has been in my name for 7 months. Sole ownership. Grandpa changed the deed before he died. Your name isn't on it. Never was. Mine is." The explosion of voices was immediate. Everyone talking at once, demanding explanations. Trevor's face went from patronizing to confused to angry in the span of 3 seconds. That's not possible. I have the deed. I filed the sale. The lawyers. I pulled out my phone, opened my photos, and held up the screen showing a document. The property deed, stamped and notarized, with my name listed as sole owner. Transfer date, 7 months ago, 3 weeks before Grandpa died. This is a certified copy from the county clerk's office. Picked it up last week when I heard rumors you were talking to developers. The original is in my safe deposit box. So whatever you think you sold, whatever deal you think you made, it's not valid because you were trying to sell my property. Trevor lunged across the table, trying to grab my phone. Uncle Paul caught him, held him back. "Let me see that," Trevor shouted. "That's fake. You faked that document. You're trying to steal what's mine." Aunt Diane's voice cut through the chaos. "Trevor, sit down. Now." Something in her tone made him obey. She turned to me, face pale. "Cameron, is this true? Did Grandpa really give you the land?" I nodded. "He called me over 3 weeks before he died, asked me to come alone, told me he'd been thinking about what would happen to the property after he was gone. Said he'd watched Trevor trying to position himself as the heir, making plans to develop and sell, talking about the land like it was already his. Grandpa didn't like that, didn't trust Trevor's judgment, so he transferred the deed to me, made me promise I'd never sell to developers, that I'd hold on to it the way he had." My mother was staring at me like I was a stranger. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" The question hurt, but I understood it. Because Grandpa asked me not to, not until I had to. He said Trevor would fight it, would try to contest it, would make everyone's life hell if he knew. Better to let Trevor think he was in control, let him make his plans, then pull the rug out when he tried to actually execute them. I looked at Trevor. His face was purple with rage, veins standing out on his forehead. "You knew I was working on this. You knew I was talking to developers. You let me spend 6 months negotiating, setting everything up, and you said nothing?" I shrugged. "You didn't ask. And honestly, I wanted to see how far you'd go. Turns out, pretty far. Lying to the family about owning property you don't have any claim to. Pretty impressive." Trevor's phone was out now, fingers flying across the screen. "I'm calling my lawyer. This is fraud. You faked that deed. I'll prove it." I let him dial. Let him talk frantically into the phone while the family watched. When he hung up, his face had gone from purple to gray. "What did they say?" Aunt Diane asked quietly. Trevor didn't answer, just stared at the table. I answered for him. They probably told him what any real estate lawyer would, that he can't sell property he doesn't own, that whatever deal he made is void, that if he accepted money from a developer for land that wasn't his to sell, he's committed fraud, that he's in serious legal trouble. Trevor's head snapped up. "I didn't commit fraud. I thought it was mine. Grandpa's will said—" I cut him off again. "The will said you were to manage the property, which is meaningless when Grandpa transferred the deed before he died. A will only distributes assets the deceased still owns. Grandpa didn't own that land when he died. I did." Uncle Paul's voice was measured, careful. "So where does that leave Trevor? If he made a deal with developers?" I'd been thinking about this for a week, ever since I'd heard Trevor had actually gone through with the sale. "That depends. Did you sign a contract, Trevor? Did you accept payment?" Trevor's silence was answer enough. My sister Natalie leaned forward. "How much did they give you?" Trevor's voice was barely a whisper. Half up front. 1.15 million. The rest was supposed to come when the title cleared and construction permits were approved. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Uncle Paul closed his eyes. "Oh, Trevor, what did you do with the money?" Trevor didn't answer, didn't have to. I could see it in his face. The money was gone or committed, probably both. Aunt Diane's voice cracked. "Where is it, Trevor?" Her son looked at her with something like panic. "I bought a house, put down a deposit on a vacation property in Cabo, made some investments. Mom, I thought it was legitimate. I thought—" She stood up so fast her chair tipped over. "You spent over $1 million in a week, without verifying the deed, without making absolutely certain the land was yours?" Trevor's face crumpled. "The lawyers said it was fine. They checked the county records. The will listed me as property manager. They said that was enough, that I had authority. I pulled up another photo on my phone. Except the county records show my name on the deed, not yours. Any competent lawyer would have caught that. So either your lawyers were incompetent or you didn't actually consult lawyers. Which is it? The silence that followed was damning. Trevor had lied about the lawyers. Or he'd found lawyers who told him what he wanted to hear, and he'd ignored the parts he didn't like. Either way, he'd committed fraud. Accepted over $1 million for property he didn't own, couldn't sell, had no legal right to even discuss with developers. The development company was going to want their money back. When they realized the sale was invalid, they'd sue. They'd go after Trevor with everything they had. Criminal charges weren't out of the question. My cousin, the golden child, had just destroyed his life out of greed and arrogance. And part of me, a dark, angry part I wasn't proud of, was satisfied to watch it happen. But another part, the part that still remembered childhood summers spent exploring those 40 acres with Trevor, felt something closer to pity. "What happens now?" Natalie asked, looking at me. "To the land? To Trevor?" I thought about Grandpa's last words to me, about holding on to the land, preserving it, keeping it safe from developers who'd turn it into another soulless subdivision. The land stays in my name, stays undeveloped. That's what Grandpa wanted. As for Trevor... I looked at my cousin. He was crying now, silent tears running down his face, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. That depends on him. He can try to work something out with the developers, explain the mistake, return the money if he still has it. Or he can lawyer up and fight, claim he had good faith belief in his authority to sell. Either way, he's looking at years of legal battles and potential criminal charges. Trevor's voice was barely audible. "I don't have the money. I can't give it back. I spent it." Aunt Diane sank back into her chair. "Then you're going to jail. You committed fraud. You took money for something you didn't own and you can't return it. That's theft. That's..." She couldn't finish, just put her face in her hands and sobbed. The Thanksgiving meal sat cold and forgotten on the table. What should have been a celebration had become a funeral for Trevor's future. My mother touched my arm. "Did you know he'd already taken money? When you came here tonight, did you know?" I nodded. I had someone watching the property. When the developer's surveying team showed up last week, I knew something had gone through. Made some calls, found out Trevor had signed contracts and accepted payment. That's why I came tonight, figured he'd announce it at dinner. Thought it was time to end this. Uncle Paul looked at me with something between respect and horror. "You let him walk into this trap." It wasn't a question. I met his gaze. "Trevor's been planning to steal this land for a year. Since before Grandpa died. I found emails on an old computer at Grandpa's house. Trevor had been researching property values, contacting developers, setting up meetings. He was just waiting for Grandpa to die so he could make his move. Except Grandpa figured it out, saw what Trevor was becoming. So he protected the land the only way he could, by taking it out of the estate completely, by giving it to the grandchild he trusted to actually honor his wishes." I looked at Trevor. "I gave you every opportunity to do the right thing, to ask questions, to verify ownership, to be honest with the family. You chose lies and arrogance instead. You did this to yourself." Trevor lunged at me again. This time, Uncle Paul wasn't fast enough. Trevor's fist caught me in the jaw, sent me sprawling backward. My chair hit the wall and I went down hard. For a moment, there was chaos. People shouting, grabbing Trevor, pulling him back. My jaw throbbed, but I could tell nothing was broken. I got to my feet, slowly. Trevor was being held by Uncle Paul and my sister's husband, struggling against their grip, screaming, "You set me up! You wanted this! You're jealous because I'm successful, and you're nothing! You've always been nothing!" The words were desperate, the tantrum of a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. I touched my jaw, winced. "I'm calling the police," I said quietly. "You just assaulted me in front of 14 witnesses. That's on top of the fraud charges you're already facing." Aunt Diane stepped between us. "Cameron, please." "Don't. He's my son. He made a mistake, but..." I shook my head. This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated theft. He knew what he was doing. He just didn't think he'd get caught. I pulled out my phone and dialed. The police arrived 20 minutes later, took statements from everyone, arrested Trevor for assault. I told them about the property fraud, and they said they'd be forwarding that to the district attorney's office for investigation. Trevor was handcuffed, read his rights, and walked out to a squad car while the family watched in silence. Aunt Diane followed the police car to the station. The rest of us stayed in the house, sitting around the destroyed dinner, trying to process what had just happened. My mother was the first to speak. "Why didn't you tell me about the land?" I could hear the hurt in her voice. "I wanted to. But Grandpa made me promise. Said if too many people knew, Trevor would find out. Would have time to fight it or manipulate things. Better to keep it secret until the moment it mattered." She nodded slowly. "And now, Trevor's life is ruined." I didn't disagree. He ruined it himself. I didn't make him talk to developers, didn't make him sign contracts or accept money for something he didn't own, didn't make him spend $1 million in a week without verifying he actually had the legal right to sell. He did all of that. All I did was own the property Grandpa gave me and wait for him to hang himself with his own rope. Natalie was looking at her phone. "It's on Facebook already. Someone from the neighborhood saw the police cars. Trevor's arrest is going viral." She showed me the screen. Local gossip pages were lighting up with speculation. Prominent businessman arrested at family Thanksgiving. Real estate fraud investigation launched. The court of public opinion was already convicting Trevor. His reputation was being destroyed in real time. Everything he'd built, his image as a successful entrepreneur, his standing in the business community, was crumbling. And it had only been an hour since his announcement. My mother stood up. "I need to go home. I need to think about this." She hugged me carefully, avoiding my bruised jaw. "I'm proud of you for honoring your grandfather's wishes, but I'm also sad. The family is broken now. This will never heal." She was right. The family fractured that night in ways that couldn't be repaired. Aunt Diane blamed me for entrapping Trevor. Several cousins took sides, some supporting my actions, others claiming I'd been vindictive and cruel. Holiday gatherings became impossible. The family tree that Grandpa had spent his life cultivating split down the middle, and there was no grafting it back together. The legal consequences for Trevor were severe. The development company sued for the return of their money plus damages. Trevor didn't have it. His house was seized. The Cabo property, which hadn't been fully purchased yet, was lost when he defaulted. Every asset he'd bought with the fraudulent money was taken. Bankruptcy would have been the smart choice, but Trevor's lawyers tried to fight, claiming he'd acted in good faith. That defense failed spectacularly when prosecutors found the emails I'd mentioned, years of Trevor researching how to sell the property, reaching out to developers while Grandpa was still alive, essentially planning the theft before it was even possible. The criminal fraud charges took 8 months to fully prosecute. I testified, providing the real deed, explaining Grandpa's reasoning, detailing Trevor's history of positioning himself as the heir. The prosecutor painted a picture of prolonged deception. The defense tried to argue that Trevor had genuinely believed the property was his based on the will's language about managing it. But the jury didn't buy it. When you accept over $1 million for something, you're expected to verify you actually have the right to sell it. Trevor's failure to do proper due diligence, combined with the evidence of his pre-planning, sank him. The verdict was guilty on 3 counts of fraud. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison and ordered restitution of the full amount he'd taken. Since Trevor had no assets left, that restitution would follow him for life, garnishing any future earnings until the debt was paid. I visited Trevor once in prison, 6 months into his sentence. He'd requested the visit through his mother, and guilt had driven me to accept. We sat across from each other in a visitation room that smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation. Trevor looked smaller somehow. Prison orange didn't suit him. His hair was shorter, his face thinner. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something harder to define. "Why did you come?" he asked. His voice was flat, empty. "Your mom asked me to." He laughed, bitter and short. "Of course she did. She still thinks this is fixable, that if we just talk, we can make peace, be a family again." He leaned forward. "But you destroyed me, Cameron. You could have just told me about the deed. Could have stopped this before I signed contracts. Instead, you watched me walk into a trap. I'd known this accusation was coming, had prepared for it. You were going to sell that land no matter what I said. You'd been planning it for years. If I'd told you about the deed, you'd have contested it. Found lawyers to argue Grandpa was senile when he signed it over. Tied the property up in court for years. By the time it was resolved, the land would have been subdivided and sold just to pay legal fees. This way, it stays in the family, stays protected. Exactly what Grandpa wanted. Trevor stared at me for a long moment. You really believe that? You think you're the hero of this story? I shook my head. No heroes here. Just a family that destroyed itself over money and pride. I honored Grandpa's wishes. You tried to profit from his death. Those are facts. Everything else is just perspective. I needed that money. Trevor's voice cracked. I had debts, bad investments. I was drowning. That land was my way out. And Grandpa, he would have understood. He would have wanted to help me. Now we were getting to the truth. What debts? I asked. Trevor looked away. Gambling. Started small, online poker, sports betting. Then I got in with some private games, high stakes. I won big at first, then started losing. The people I borrowed from weren't patient. They wanted their money. I needed a big score to clear everything. The land was that score. Grandpa's death was almost a relief. Because it meant I could finally access that asset. The honesty was staggering in its ugliness. Trevor had been waiting for our grandfather to die so he could sell his legacy to pay gambling debts. Did Grandpa know? I asked. About the gambling. Trevor nodded slowly. He confronted me 6 months before he died. Someone had told him I was in trouble. He offered to help, but only if I got treatment. Admitted the problem. Went to counseling. I refused. Told him I had everything under control, that I'd make my money back. He looked at me. That's when he transferred the deed to you, wasn't it? Right after that conversation. He knew I couldn't be trusted. The pieces fell into place. Grandpa hadn't just been protecting the land. He'd been trying to save Trevor from himself. By removing the temptation, by putting the property out of reach. He'd hoped Trevor would be forced to face his demons. Instead, Trevor had doubled down, convinced himself he still had claim to the land, and committed fraud to get what he felt he deserved. The tragedy wasn't just what Trevor had done. It was that he'd never understood what Grandpa was trying to do for him. I left the prison that day knowing I'd never visit again. Trevor wasn't interested in redemption or reconciliation. He wanted validation for his choices. He wanted me to admit I'd been wrong to let him fall. But I hadn't been wrong. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their actions. Grandpa had understood that. He'd tried to help Trevor by restricting his access to assets he'd abuse. When that hadn't worked, when Trevor had found a way around the safeguards, consequences had to follow. The land stayed in my name. I honored Grandpa's wishes by keeping it undeveloped. Put conservation easements on it so it could never be built on, even after I died. The 40 acres would remain woodland, a small pocket of wilderness in an increasingly developed town. It wasn't worth millions anymore. The easements had killed the development value. But it was worth something more important. It was a legacy, a reminder that some things matter more than money. Trevor served 3 years of his sentence before being released on parole. I heard through family that he'd moved to another state, changed his name, started over. Aunt Diane never spoke to me again. She'd chosen her son's version of events, that I'd entrapped him, that I'd been jealous and vindictive, that I'd destroyed his life out of spite. Other family members had chosen sides or tried to remain neutral, but the dynamic was forever altered. Holiday gatherings didn't include both sides anymore. We'd split into separate celebrations, separate lives. The family Grandpa had built, that he'd tried so hard to keep united, had fractured anyway. Not because of his death, but because one member had valued money over integrity, had chosen greed over family, and the rest of us had been forced to choose between enabling that behavior or holding him accountable. I think about that Thanksgiving dinner sometimes, the moment Trevor stood up to make his announcement, so confident, so proud of himself. The shock on his face when I'd shown him the real deed. The way everything had unraveled so quickly, from triumph to catastrophe in the span of an hour. Could I have handled it differently? Probably. Could I have pulled Trevor aside privately, shown him the deed, given him a chance to back out before making a public announcement? Maybe. But would he have listened? Or would he have doubled down, attacked me privately instead of publicly, tried to manipulate the situation to his advantage? Based on everything I knew about Trevor, about his gambling addiction and his pattern of deception, I believe he'd have fought me regardless. The public revelation had forced accountability in a way a private conversation never would have. It had exposed his lies to the family, made it impossible for him to spin an alternative narrative. Sometimes, accountability requires an audience. The land is peaceful now. I visit it often, walking the same trails Grandpa and I used to hike. There's a massive oak tree near the center of the property where we scattered some of his ashes. I sit under it sometimes and think about legacy, about what we leave behind. Grandpa left 40 acres of woodland and a family that couldn't agree on whether protecting it had been worth the cost. Trevor left debt, broken relationships, and a prison record. What will I leave? I don't have children yet, no direct heirs to pass the land to. But I've made arrangements. Conservation trust, educational programs for local schools. The land will be used to teach future generations about ecology, preservation, the importance of wild spaces. It will be Grandpa's legacy, not in his name, but in his spirit. And maybe someday, when enough time has passed and wounds have scarred over, the family will see that too. Natalie visits the property with me now. She understands why I did what I did, even if she wishes the cost had been lower. We talk about Trevor sometimes, wondering if prison changed him or just hardened him further. We hope he found peace, found a way to move past his addiction and his anger. But we don't reach out. That bridge burned too completely to rebuild. Some family bonds, once broken, stay broken. That's a truth I've learned to live with. I did what Grandpa asked me to do, protected the land he loved, honored his wishes even when it cost me relationships and peace. Whether that makes me right or merely stubborn, I'll probably never know. But when I sit under that oak tree, watching sunlight filter through leaves Grandpa once stood beneath, I feel certain of one thing. This land is worth more than any price Trevor could have gotten for it. This land is priceless. And it's safe, and that was always the point. 5 years after that Thanksgiving dinner, I received a letter from Trevor. No return address, postmarked from Oregon. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 sentences. You were right about the land. I understand now why Grandpa chose you. I hope someday I can find something worth protecting the way you protected his legacy. No apology for the violence, the lies, the years of legal warfare. But maybe an acknowledgement of something deeper. That purpose matters more than profit. That some legacies are worth the cost of defending them. I kept the letter in a drawer with Grandpa's old photographs and the original deed with my name on it. Physical evidence of choices made and consequences faced. Trevor's life had been permanently altered by his greed. Mine had been shaped by my grandfather's trust. In the end, we both got exactly what we'd chosen, even if we hadn't fully understood what we were choosing at the time. The land endures, green and wild and protected, exactly as it should be. That's the only justice that matters. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.